The carriage jolted to a halt before the imposing wrought-iron gate, making Evelyn Hartwell grip the upholstered seat tightly. Through the window, blurred by the morning rain, she gazed at the majestic mansion that rose like a grey stone fortress against the 1847 London sky. Each arched window seemed to watch her with suspicion, as if it knew she did not belong in that world of unimaginable privilege and wealth. "Mrs. Hartwell?" The coachman's voice cut through her nervous thoughts. "We have arrived at Ashworth Residence." Evelyn took a deep breath, adjusting her worn cotton gloves and smoothing the navy blue wool skirt that was her only decent option. At 22, she had known only the modest life of a Yorkshire parsonage, where she had grown up under the care of a vicar uncle after her parents' deaths. Now, with her savings almost depleted and a letter of recommendation as her sole valuable possession, she found herself at the threshold of an opportunity that could change her destiny. The butler who greeted her was a tall, solemn man whose grey hair and impeccable posture conveyed decades of service to the family. His eyes quickly assessed her, from her worn shoes to her simple hat, and Evelyn noticed the almost imperceptible frown that revealed his silent disapproval. "I am Whitmore, the head butler of this house," he announced in a grave voice. "His lordship awaits you in the library. Follow me." The halls they passed through were of an opulence Evelyn had never imagined existed. Persian carpets covered polished marble floors, while paintings by European masters adorned mahogany-paneled walls. Crystal chandeliers hung like golden constellations, reflecting the light that filtered through windows framed by burgundy velvet curtains. The library was even more impressive. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, packed with leather-bound volumes, created a sanctuary of knowledge that made Evelyn's heart race. The aroma of ancient parchment and beeswax hung in the air, mingled with the subtle scent of fine tobacco. It was then that she saw him. Frederick Ashworth stood by the panoramic window, his hands clasped behind his back as he observed the formal gardens that stretched beyond the stone terrace. Even in profile, his presence dominated the room with a natural authority that spoke of generations of power and influence. His dark brown hair, slightly wavy, brushed the collar of his impeccably cut frock coat, and when he turned to face her, Evelyn felt the impact of his grey-green eyes like a physical blow. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his late 30s, but there was something in his expression that spoke of profound pain, a wound that time had not yet fully healed. Fine lines around his eyes suggested sleepless nights, and the rigidity of his posture revealed a man who kept the world at a distance through carefully constructed barriers. "Mrs. Hartwell." His voice was grave and controlled. But Evelyn detected a note of skepticism. "Whitmore, you may withdraw." The silence that followed was as dense as a London fog. Frederick studied her with the same attention he would give a horse at market, and Evelyn felt a blush creep up her cheeks under his relentless scrutiny. She lifted her chin, determined not to be intimidated, even though she knew her modest appearance contrasted drastically with the magnificence surrounding her. "I received your letter of application for the governess position," he began, walking slowly around the mahogany table that separated them. "I must admit I was intrigued by your audacity in presenting yourself for a position of such responsibility." "Audacity, your lordship?" Evelyn managed to keep her voice steady, despite the nervousness that tightened her stomach. "A young, unmarried woman with no prior experience in childcare, no knowledge of the world beyond a rural parish in Yorkshire." Each word was delivered with the precision of a blade. "What qualifications do you possess to educate the daughter of the Duke of Ashworth?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Evelyn felt all her insecurities rise like ghosts, whispering that she was nothing but a foolish dreamer who had dared to aspire beyond her station. But then, something within her rebelled against the arrogance of that man, however imposing he might be. "It is true I possess neither noble titles nor riches, your lordship," she replied, holding his gaze. "But I was educated by a scholar who taught me Latin, French, and mathematics. I can play the piano and paint in watercolors, as is proper for a lady. More importantly, I understand that a child needs more than formal lessons. They need affection, patience, and someone who sees them as a person, not merely a project to be molded." Frederick stopped abruptly. turning to face her with an expression that mixed surprise with something that might have been interest. Had Evelyn not known better? Affection. The word left his lips as if it were something distasteful. Mrs. Hartwell, I am not seeking a maternal substitute for Charlotte. The child needs discipline, formal education, and preparation for her future responsibilities as a member of this family. Sentimentalities are luxuries I cannot afford. As he mentioned Charlotte, a shadow passed across his face, so fleeting Evelyn almost missed it. But she saw it. That fissure in the armor of indifference he wore, revealing for an instant the vulnerability of a father who did not know how to connect with his own daughter. And what about the child? She asked softly. What she needs might be different from what your lordship considers necessary. Frederick's eyes narrowed dangerously. It is not my place to receive advice about my daughter from a complete stranger, madam, especially one who clearly does not possess the refinement necessary to move in our society. The deliberate cruelty of his words struck Evelyn like a slap, but she refused to retreat. I beg your pardon if my frankness has offended you, your lordship. I only believe that a child who has lost her mother needs enough. Frederick's outburst echoed through the library, making the chandelier's crystals tinkle softly. Do not dare to mention my wife. You know nothing of our family, our loss, our challenges. Evelyn saw the raw pain in his eyes before he turned back to the window, his shoulders tense as violin strings. The silence stretched between them, heavy with tension and unspoken words. She understood then that his rudeness was not mere arrogance. It was the armor of a man shattered by grief, who had chosen coldness as a shield against further suffering. I am sorry for the loss of the Duchess, she said finally, her voice soft but firm. I cannot imagine your pain, nor Charlotte's, but I can offer dedication, patience, and a heart willing to care for your daughter as if she were my own family. Frederick remained still for long moments, and Evelyn wondered if she had gone too far. When he finally turned, his expression had returned to its mask of frosty courtesy. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Hartwell, he said formally. Whitmore will see you out. Good afternoon. The dismissal was as abrupt as it was final. Evelyn felt her dream disintegrating like sand between her fingers, but she maintained her dignity as she curtsied respectfully. Good afternoon, your lordship. As she followed Whitmore through the sumptuous corridors, Evelyn couldn't help but imagine what little Charlotte would be like, growing up in that magnificent but seemingly cold mansion, under the care of a father who had allowed grief to turn him into an ice statue. The child had lost not only her mother but also the father who had once been capable of loving without reservation. The rain had ceased when she left the mansion, but the clouds remained heavy and threatening, like an omen of the uncertain future that awaited her. The inn, the Golden Swan, was not exactly the refuge Evelyn had imagined finding in London. The building of bricks blackened by the city's soot was squeezed between a blacksmith's workshop and a draper's shop, its small windows allowing only timid shafts of the grey afternoon light to pass through. The aroma of mutton stew mingled with less pleasant odours rising from the bustling streets, creating an atmosphere that contrasted drastically with the opulence of Ashworth Mansion. Evelyn slowly ascended the narrow staircase that led to her room on the second floor, each wooden step groaning beneath her feet like a lament. The disastrous interview still echoed in her mind, Frederick's cutting coldness, the way he had dismissed her as if she were an impertinent intruder. His words about her not possessing the necessary refinement burned like a hot iron, not because they were untrue, but because they contained a cruel dose of truth. The room she had rented with her last coins was austere, a narrow bed with patched sheets, a worn chest of drawers, and a window that offered a view of the inner courtyard where chickens pecked among the debris. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, removing her gloves and letting them fall to the floor with a deep sigh that seemed to carry the full weight of her shattered hopes. 3 days. That was all her savings would allow in that place before she would have to make a desperate decision. Returning to Yorkshire would mean admitting defeat, accepting that she had been foolish to dream beyond her station. But staying in London without prospects was equally unthinkable. As afternoon deepened into twilight, Evelyn tried to occupy her mind by rereading the pages of Persuasion she had brought in her luggage. Jane Austen's words, however, seemed to dance before her eyes without forming sense. Her thoughts constantly returned to the Ashworth Mansion's library, to that fleeting moment when she had seen the raw pain in Frederick's eyes before he turned back to the window. A man shattered by grief. A father who had lost not only his wife, but apparently also the ability to connect with his own daughter. And Charlotte, poor child, growing up in that atmosphere of elegant coldness, surrounded by luxuries but deprived of the human warmth every young soul needed. It was then that she heard it, light footsteps on the staircase, different from the heavy shuffle of the other guests. They were small steps, hurried, almost furtive. Evelyn frowned, closing her book and approaching the door. The sound stopped directly in front of her room, followed by a timid knock that was barely audible. "Come in," she called. Imagining it was one of the inn's maids, the door opened slowly, revealing a sight that made Evelyn's heart leap in her chest. A small girl, no more than 6 years old, peered through the gap with enormous, deep blue eyes that Evelyn recognized immediately. Golden hair escaped from an elaborate arrangement, framing a pale face marked by recent tears. Charlotte. Evelyn immediately knelt, bringing herself to the child's height. "My dear, how did you get here?" The girl fully entered the room, closing the door behind her with the care of someone who did not wish to be discovered. Her dark green velvet dress was impeccable. Her fine leather boots showed not a single speck of mud, evidence that she had arrived by carriage, not by walking through London's dirty streets. "I heard Papa talking with Whitmore about where you were staying," Charlotte said in a melodious voice that carried the refined diction of her class, but also a surprising determination for such a small child. "I told the coachman Patterson I wanted to go to the sweet shop on Regent Street, but I asked him to stop here first." Evelyn felt a mixture of admiration and concern. The girl's intelligence was evident, as was her ability to manipulate the situation to achieve her goals. But the courage required to seek out a stranger also revealed how desperate she was for human connection. "Charlotte, your presence here is a wonderful surprise, but I'm sure your father is worried. You shouldn't have left the mansion without permission." The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back with impressive willpower for someone so young. "Papa didn't even notice I left. He never notices. He's always in the library or the study, too busy with important papers for a girl like me." The pain in those words was so palpable that Evelyn felt her chest tighten. She extended her hand, and Charlotte accepted it without hesitation, her small, cold fingers intertwining with hers like anchors seeking safe harbor. "I am sure that's not true, dear." "Your father loves you very much. Then why doesn't he smile anymore?" The question came out as a broken whisper. "Before, when Mama was with us, Papa would laugh with me. He would tell me stories about knights and princesses, take me for walks in the gardens. Now he looks at me and he's sad, as if I remind him of things he'd rather forget." Evelyn pulled Charlotte closer, allowing the girl to settle beside her on the narrow bed. The child nestled against her with a naturalness that spoke of her yearning for maternal affection. "Sometimes, when people we love die, we become so sad that we forget how to show love to those who are still with us," she explained softly, stroking the golden hair. "It doesn't mean we don't love them. It just means we are lost in the darkness of longing." Charlotte looked up, studying Evelyn's face with a disconcerting intensity. "Do you know about people dying? I lost my parents when I was only a little older than you. I know how much it hurts, how it feels as if the world has lost its colors. And did you become all right?" "It took time, but yes. And you will too, dear. You and your father will find your way back to each other." Charlotte remained quiet for a moment, processing the words. Then surprisingly she smiled, the first genuine smile Evelyn had seen since she entered the room. "You have a gentle voice like Mama's did. And your eyes are kind." The girl delicately touched Evelyn's face. "Please come be my governess. I promise to be the best student who ever lived. I will study French and Latin and mathematics, and I will never complain about piano lessons." Evelyn's heart broke a little more. "Oh, my sweet Charlotte, I would very much like to be your governess. But your father decided I am not suitable for the position." "But you are." The vehemence in the child's voice surprised her. You make me feel how I felt before Mama got sick, as if I were important and loved. The tears finally overflowed. You are the only one who makes me want to laugh again like Mama used to. The words struck Evelyn like sunbeams piercing stormy clouds. This little child, growing up in a magnificent but emotionally barren mansion, had recognized something in her that the powerful Duke of Ashworth had failed to see, or refused to see. Charlotte did not need more formal lessons or rigid discipline. She needed someone who saw her as a complete person, worthy of love and attention. Charlotte, Evelyn gently cupped the small face in her hands, wiping away the tears with her thumbs. You are a very special and brave girl. Anyone would be blessed to have you as a daughter or pupil. Then why can't Papa see me? The question echoed in the small room like a cry for help. Evelyn understood then that Charlotte was not merely a motherless child. She was an orphan of both parents, for Frederick had allowed himself to die emotionally along with his wife. Perhaps he needs help remembering how to do that, Evelyn murmured. More to herself than to Charlotte. Can you help him? And me? Before Evelyn could answer, heavy, hurried footsteps echoed in the corridor, accompanied by tense masculine voices. Charlotte stiffened, immediately recognizing the sounds of the approaching search. Lady Charlotte! Lady Charlotte, where are you? Butler Whitmore's voice pierced the thin walls like a blade of concern, and then, dominating all others, the voice of Frederick Ashworth, laden with an anguish he could no longer hide. Charlotte! Charlotte, answer me! The girl clung to Evelyn's arm, her blue eyes wide with fear. He's going to be very angry with me. No, Evelyn reassured her, though her own heart raced as she realized she would soon face that imperious man again. He was worried. That's what parents do when they love their children. They worry. The footsteps stopped before the door, followed by an authoritative knock that made the hinges tremble. The door burst open with such force that it slammed against the wall, making Charlotte jump slightly and cling even more tightly to Evelyn's arm. Frederick Ashworth appeared in the doorway like a storm personified, his brown hair disheveled and his face marked by a pallor that spoke of hours of anguish. His gray-green eyes swept the narrow room until they landed on the small figure of his daughter. And for a moment, the mask of control he wore completely shattered. Charlotte. The word escaped him as a sigh of relief so profound it made Evelyn's chest tighten. Thank God you are safe. Behind him Whitmore appeared, panting, the usually composed butler showing clear signs of the desperate search. 2 footmen waited in the corridor, their relieved expressions visible even in the late afternoon gloom. Papa. Charlotte slowly rose from the bed, still holding Evelyn's hand as if it were her only anchor in the world. I didn't mean to make you worry. Frederick stepped into the room, then stopped abruptly, as if only then realizing where his daughter was and with whom. His eyes met Evelyn's, and she saw in them a storm of emotions, relief, anger, confusion, and something deeper he was desperately trying to conceal. Mrs. Hartwell. His voice had regained some of its formal coldness, but it still trembled at the edges. I would like an explanation as to why my daughter is in your rooms. Papa. Don't blame Mrs. Evelyn, Charlotte interjected before Evelyn could reply, her small voice gaining a courage that surprised everyone in the room. She didn't do anything wrong. I was the one who came looking for her. You, what?
Frederick knelt before his daughter, his large aristocratic hands gently gripping Charlotte's small shoulders.
It was the first truly paternal gesture Evelyn had seen him make, and the unconscious tenderness in his touch made her understand that beneath all that icy armor, there still existed the man who had once been a loving father. I heard you tell Whitmore where Mrs. Evelyn was staying, Charlotte confessed, casting her eyes down to her own hands. I told Patterson I wanted to go buy sweets, but I asked him to stop here first. But why, child? Why would you do something so dangerous, so reckless? The question came out laden with genuine incomprehension, and Evelyn realized that Frederick truly did not understand the motives that had led his daughter to such an act of silent rebellion. The emotional blindness that grief had created in him was so complete that he could not see the signs of yearning that Charlotte displayed. Charlotte looked up at her father, and for the first time since Frederick had entered the room, her tears began to flow freely. Because she makes me feel how I felt when Mama was with us. She truly listens to me, Papa. She makes me laugh. She makes me feel important. The words hit Frederick like physical blows. Evelyn saw him grow even paler, if that were possible, and for a moment he seemed as lost as his own daughter. His hands trembled imperceptibly on Charlotte's shoulders. You are important, Charlotte. You are the most important thing in the world to me. Then why do you never smile at me anymore? Why do you pull away when I come near? Why do you look at me and become sad? The raw pain in the girl's voice echoed in the small room like a cry for help. Frederick closed his eyes, and when he reopened them, Evelyn saw in them an anguish so profound that she felt her heart break for both of them, father and daughter, trapped in their own prisons of pain, Frederick began, then stopped, clearly struggling with words that refused to come. Charlotte, Mrs. Evelyn said that sometimes, when people we love die, we get so sad that we forget how to show love to those who are still with us, Charlotte said softly, repeating Evelyn's words with the precision of a child who had clung to them as to a lifeline. Frederick turned to Evelyn, his eyes seeking hers with an intensity that made her feel as if she were being truly seen for the first time. Not as an unsuitable candidate for a position, not as an intruder in his aristocratic world, but as a person who, somehow, had managed to touch his daughter in a way he himself no longer could. "Is that true?" he asked, and his voice had lost all imperial authority, reduced to the vulnerable whisper of a man desperate for answers. Evelyn felt the weight of the moment's responsibility. Every word she said now could determine the future of the relationship between that father and daughter. She looked at Charlotte, who watched her with hopeful eyes, then back at Frederick. "When we lose someone we love deeply, Your Lordship, sometimes the pain is so overwhelming that we close ourselves off to protect our hearts from further suffering. But in doing so, without realizing it, we also close ourselves off from those who are still with us and who are also suffering the same loss." Frederick studied her intently, as if trying to decipher a complex code. "And you believe that is what I did? Close myself off from Charlotte." "It is not my place to judge Your Lordship's actions," Evelyn replied carefully. "But I can say that Charlotte is an extraordinarily intelligent and sensitive girl who loves her father deeply and yearns for his attention and affection. I do give her attention. I have hired the best tutors. I provide everything she needs." "With all due respect, Your Lordship," Evelyn gently interrupted him, "a child needs more than material provisions. She needs to know she is seen, heard, and valued for the person she is, not just for what she can become." Charlotte, who had been following the conversation with wide eyes, suddenly broke free from Evelyn and ran to her father, throwing her small arms around his neck with desperate urgency. "Papa, I miss Mama just as much as you do. But I also miss you, even though you're right here in the same house with me. It's like I lost both of you at the same time." Charlotte's words broke something fundamental within Frederick. Evelyn watched him crumble, all his carefully constructed defenses collapsing like sand walls before the tide. He pressed his daughter against his chest, burying his face in her golden hair, and his shoulders shook with the force of a pain finally released. "Forgive me," he murmured against Charlotte's hair, his voice broken and barely audible. "Forgive me, my little one. I didn't realize. I didn't mean for you to feel abandoned. I thought I was protecting you from my pain, but I was only causing you more pain. I don't need to be protected from your sadness, Papa. I need to share it with you. I need us to remember Mama together, not each alone." Evelyn felt tears prick her own eyes as she witnessed that moment of reconnection. Discreetly, she began to withdraw, feeling that her presence in that intimate reconciliation was an intrusion. But Frederick's voice stopped her. "Mrs. Hartwell." He lifted his head, and when his eyes met hers, there was no longer coldness or arrogance in them. "Charlotte is right. You managed to see something in my daughter, and in her, that I had lost the ability to see. Your Lordship, no." He rose, still holding Charlotte, who nestled against his chest with evident satisfaction. "I must ask for your forgiveness. My behavior earlier today was inexcusable. I allowed my grief to turn into arrogance and cruelty, and I directed it against someone who did not deserve such treatment." Evelyn was speechless. The haughty man who had dismissed her with such coldness hours earlier had vanished, replaced by someone genuinely human, vulnerable, and capable of recognizing his mistakes. "Do you accept my apologies?" he asked, and there was a humility in his voice she would never have imagined possible. "Of course, your lordship. We all make mistakes when we are grieving." "Papa," Charlotte spoke up suddenly, lifting her head to look into her father's eyes. "Can Mrs. Evelyn be my governess now?" "Please. She makes me want to learn and grow, and she makes me feel loved at the same time." Frederick looked at his daughter, then at Evelyn, and she saw the exact moment he made a decision that would change the course of their lives. "If Mrs. Hartwell is willing to accept the position," he said slowly, "it would be an honor to have her as Charlotte's governess." Evelyn's heart leaped in her chest. But before she could reply, Frederick continued, "But this time, I would like to extend the invitation properly." He stepped closer, Charlotte still in his arms. "Mrs. Hartwell, would you accept joining our family, because that is what you would be, part of our family, and help us find our way back to each other?" Evelyn looked at that proud man who had set aside his pride for love of his daughter, at the brave girl who had risked everything for a chance at connection, and knew that her answer would change not only their lives, but her own as well. "It would be an honor and a privilege," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. The following morning brought a palpable transformation to Ashworth Mansion. Evelyn awoke in her new quarters, an elegant room on the second floor, close to the family's, with a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in months. The golden light of dawn filtered through the pale blue silk curtains, illuminating polished oak furniture and a writing desk positioned by the window that offered a view of the formal gardens. Her few belongings seemed diminutive in that refined setting, but Evelyn felt, for the first time since arriving in London, truly welcome. The difference in treatment was remarkable. Where before she had found coldness and suspicion, she now received respectful courtesy from the servants and genuine affection from Charlotte, who had insisted on helping her unpack her things the previous evening. A soft knock on the door interrupted her morning thoughts. "Mrs. Hartwell?" Charlotte's melodious voice carried a joy Evelyn had not yet heard. "May I come in?" "Naturally, dear." Charlotte entered wearing a light pink muslin dress, her golden hair tied back in elaborate braids that framed her radiant little face. The transformation in the girl was extraordinary. Where before there had been contained sadness, now shone a hopeful anticipation that rejuvenated her entire expression. "Papa said you would start my lessons today," she announced, skipping slightly on her feet. "He also said we could have breakfast together in the smaller drawing room instead of the formal dining room. He said it would be more cozy." The word cozy sounded strange on the child's lips, as if it were a new concept being experimented with. Evelyn smiled, understanding that Frederick was making a conscious effort to create a less austere environment for his daughter. How wonderful. "And are you eager to begin?" "Oh, yes. But I'm also a little nervous," Charlotte confessed, wringing her small hands. "What if I'm not as clever as you expect? What if I disappoint you?" Evelyn knelt before the girl, gently holding her restless hands. "Charlotte, there's no possibility of you disappointing me. Learning isn't about being perfect from the start. It's about curiosity, effort, and growth. We will discover your interests and talents together. Even if I don't like mathematics?" "Especially if you don't like mathematics," Evelyn laughed softly. "We'll find ways to make it interesting. Perhaps through games or stories." Charlotte's eyes widened with surprise and pleasure. "Games? To learn mathematics? There are many ways to learn, dear. Education doesn't have to be a joyless, arduous task." They went down together to the smaller drawing room, a space Evelyn had not yet seen. To her surprise, she found it to be an intimate and welcoming room, with armchairs upholstered in warm tones arranged around a marble fireplace. Frederick was already present, reading correspondence by the window, wearing a navy blue tailcoat that highlighted his eyes. When he saw them enter, he immediately rose, and Evelyn noticed that his posture had lost some of the formal rigidity that had characterized their previous encounters. There was still a reservation in his manner, but also a clear effort to be more approachable. "Good morning." Mrs. Hartwell, Charlotte. His voice retained its formality, but carried a warmth that had not been there before. I hope you both rested well. Very well. Thank you, Your Grace, Evelyn replied, noting how Charlotte immediately ran to her father and clung to his arm with a naturalness that spoke of a reconnection in progress. Papa. Mrs. Hartwell said we're going to learn mathematics through games. Can you imagine? Frederick looked over his daughter's head at Evelyn, and she saw approval in his eyes. Is that so? What an innovative approach. I believe learning should be engaging, especially for young, curious minds, Evelyn explained. Charlotte demonstrates remarkable intelligence. It would be a waste to stifle it with overly rigid methods. I quite agree. Frederick settled Charlotte into a chair before taking his own. In fact, I would like to discuss the curriculum with you if it is convenient. Evelyn nodded, surprised that he would solicit her opinion rather than simply impose his expectations. It was another sign of the transformation the previous evening's crisis had wrought in him. Breakfast passed more relaxedly than any meal Evelyn had imagined possible in that house. Charlotte chatted animatedly about her favorite books. Frederick occasionally contributed observations that demonstrated his deep knowledge of his daughter, knowledge that had been present, but blocked by his unprocessed grief. Charlotte has always shown a facility for languages, commented Frederick, as he broke off a piece of toast. Her mother spoke French fluently and had begun to teach her before. He hesitated, the familiar shadow crossing his face. Mama used to say that each language was like a door to a new world, Charlotte completed softly, without the anguish such a memory would have previously provoked. She taught me a few French songs. Perhaps you could sing them for me later, Evelyn suggested. We could work on the pronunciation and perhaps learn some new ones. Do you know French songs too? Some. My uncle believed music was fundamental to a complete education, Frederick observed her with growing interest. Your uncle seems to have been a man of broad vision for a country vicar. He was indeed. He believed that knowledge should not be the exclusive privilege of the upper classes, and he made sure to provide me with as comprehensive an education as possible. Evelyn paused, then added with a shy smile, though I admit, I never imagined such an education would bring me to a London mansion. And we are fortunate it brought you, Charlotte declared with touching conviction, making both Evelyn and Frederick smile genuinely. After breakfast, Frederick accompanied them to the library, where they had decided to establish Charlotte's study room. The morning light transformed the space, dispelling some of the intimidating atmosphere Evelyn recalled from her first visit. I would like to propose an unconventional arrangement, Frederick said, addressing Evelyn while Charlotte explored the bookshelves in search of interesting books. Traditionally, noble parents fully delegate their children's education to governesses or tutors, but I would like to participate more actively in Charlotte's learning. Evelyn studied him, intrigued. What kind of participation does your Grace have in mind? Perhaps I could join you occasionally during lessons, especially those of history and literature. I would like to share with Charlotte some of our family's stories and traditions that her mother and I used to tell her. The request revealed both vulnerability and determination. Frederick was clearly striving to rebuild his connection with his daughter, but also recognized that he needed help navigating this process. I think that would be wonderful, Evelyn replied sincerely. Charlotte would benefit enormously from your presence and knowledge. Papa will study with me. Charlotte had overheard the conversation and came running over, her blue eyes shining with happiness. Like we used to? Like we used to, Frederick confirmed, kneeling to be at his daughter's height. If you wish, naturally. Oh, I do. I do very much. Charlotte threw herself into her father's arms with such enthusiasm that she almost knocked him over, eliciting a genuine laugh from him, the first sound of real joy Evelyn had heard him make. The rest of the morning passed quickly as they arranged the space and planned the curriculum. Evelyn was impressed by Charlotte's intelligence and her thirst for knowledge, but also by the way Frederick gradually relaxed in their presence, allowing his natural personality to emerge from beneath the layers of grief and formality. As lunchtime approached, Frederick addressed Evelyn with a slightly hesitant expression. Mrs. Hartwell, I would like to invite you to join us for family meals, if that would be appropriate. Charlotte has expressed that wish, and I agree with her. It was another gesture of inclusion that went beyond conventional expectations for a governess. Evelyn felt she was being integrated not just as an educator, but as a member of the family, a sensation both comforting and slightly intimidating. "It would be an honor," she replied, watching Charlotte beam at the news. That afternoon, while Charlotte rested, Frederick asked Evelyn to accompany him on a walk through the gardens. The autumnal air was fresh and invigorating, and the gravel paths wound among flower beds still colorful with the season's last blooms. "I wanted to thank you," he said abruptly as they walked side by side among the rose bushes, "for what you did yesterday, the way you spoke with Charlotte, how you helped me to see what I was doing, or failing to do. Your Grace, you needn't thank me. Anyone who saw Charlotte would perceive her need for connection. But I didn't, did I?" His voice carried a painful self-reproach. Her own father, and I was so lost in my grief that I became blind to hers. Evelyn stopped walking, turning to face him completely. "Grief can do that to us. It doesn't mean you are less of a father or less of a man. It just means you are human." Frederick studied her intensely, as if trying to decipher a mystery. "How can someone so young possess such wisdom about pain and loss? Pain respects no age, Your Grace, and sometimes it is precisely the wounds we suffer that make us capable of recognizing and helping to heal the wounds of others." For a long moment, they looked at each other in silence, and Evelyn felt something pass between them, a mutual recognition, an understanding that went beyond the circumstances that had brought them together. Then Frederick looked away, and the moment dissolved like morning mist. "Charlotte already seems like a different child," he observed, resuming their walk. "She always was that child. She just needed permission to shine again. And I? Can I also learn to be a father again?" The question came out as a vulnerable whisper, and Evelyn felt her heart clench at the courage it had taken him to ask it. "Your Grace never ceased to be a father. You merely temporarily lost your way back to your daughter. But today, seeing you together, I can affirm that you have already found that path." Frederick smiled then, a small but genuine smile that completely transformed his expression. And Evelyn understood that her own journey in that house was only just beginning. The following weeks brought an early spring to the Ashworth estate, and with it a transformation that extended far beyond the gardens blooming under April's more generous sun. Evelyn had established a routine that worked like well-harmonized music, mornings dedicated to Charlotte's formal lessons, afternoons of practical activities in the gardens or library, and occasional evenings when Frederick joined them to share family stories or discuss the girls' progress. Charlotte had blossomed like a rose that had finally received adequate light. Her laughter echoed through the mansion's corridors, a sound the servants remarked they hadn't heard in over a year. Her studies progressed with a rapidity that surprised even Evelyn. The girl possessed a sharp and curious mind that absorbed knowledge like dry earth absorbs rain after a long drought. But it was on a Thursday afternoon that everything changed. Evelyn was in the library, preparing the next day's lessons, when Charlotte burst through the door with an urgency that immediately alerted her. The girl's small face was flushed with excitement, her golden hair escaping its usually impeccable braids. "Mrs. Evelyn! Mrs. Evelyn!" Charlotte ran to her, her words tumbling out in her haste. "You must come and see. Papa is in the rose garden with a very elegant lady, and she's holding his arm in a very intimate way." Evelyn's heart gave an uneven leap, a strange sensation of discomfort spreading through her chest. During these weeks of cohabitation, she had developed not only affection for Charlotte, but also a growing admiration for Frederick. Watching him reconnect with his daughter, seeing him gradually allow his true personality to emerge from the armor of grief he had built, had awakened feelings she tried to keep carefully guarded. "Charlotte, my dear," she said in a voice she hoped sounded casual, "it's perfectly normal for your father to receive visitors. He is a duke, after all, but this isn't an ordinary visit," Charlotte insisted, pulling her by the hand towards the window that overlooked the gardens. "She's wearing a very pretty blue dress and has hair like melted gold, and Papa is smiling at her the way he used to smile at Mama." Charlotte's words struck Evelyn like physical blows. She reluctantly approached the window, her heart beating erratically as her eyes searched for the scene the girl described. There they were, walking slowly through the rose garden, which was beginning to show the first buds of spring. Frederick, elegant in his dark green tailcoat, offered his arm to a woman who was, even from a distance, clearly a lady of the highest society. Her sapphire blue silk gown was of the latest Parisian fashion, and her blonde hair was arranged in an elaborate coiffure that spoke of hours in the company of an experienced lady's maid. But it was not the visitor's elegance that made Evelyn's stomach clench painfully. It was the way Frederick leaned in to hear what she said, how he smiled in response to her words, how he seemed completely at ease in her company. There was an intimacy in their gestures that spoke of old familiarity, of mutual comfort. "Who is she?" Evelyn asked, trying to keep her voice neutral, as she watched Frederick guide the lady to a marble bench beneath a wisteria-covered pergola. "I don't know," Charlotte replied, pressing her face against the window pane. "But I don't like her. There's something about the way she looks at our house, as if she already considers herself mistress of everything." Evelyn was about to reprimand Charlotte for such a comment when Whitmore appeared in the library, his usually impassive expression showing signs of disturbance. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said formally, "His Grace requests your presence in the blue drawing room. There is a situation that requires your attention." The term situation in the butler's words sounded ominous. Evelyn followed him through the corridors, Charlotte clinging to her side despite Whitmore's polite protests that it was not appropriate for a child. The blue drawing room was one of the mansion's most formal spaces, used only for occasions of great importance. Upon entering, Evelyn immediately understood why she had been summoned. Frederick stood by the fireplace, his tense posture contrasting with the relaxation she had observed in the garden. The elegant lady was seated in a brocade armchair, her gloved hands clasped in her lap with a composure that spoke of years of aristocratic training. "Ah, Mrs. Hartwell?" Frederick turned as they entered, and Evelyn noticed a tension in his eyes that she couldn't quite interpret. "I would like to present you to Lady Penelope Worthington, Countess of Marlborough." "Penelope, this is Mrs. Hartwell, Charlotte's governess." Lady Penelope rose gracefully, her impressive height enhanced by her perfect posture. Her blue eyes studied Evelyn with an intensity that seemed to catalogue every detail, from the simple but well-cut dress to the modest shoes, from the hands calloused by work to the brown hair arranged without elaborate artifice. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said in a melodious voice that carried the perfect diction of the highest aristocracy. "Frederick has told me much about you. Apparently you have made quite a memorable impression on our little Charlotte." There was something in the way she pronounced "our" that made Evelyn stiffen. "Lady Marlborough," she replied with careful courtesy. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure is mine. In fact, it is about Charlotte that we need to speak." Lady Penelope turned to Frederick with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "As I mentioned in the garden, Frederick, I believe it is time we considered a more suitable education for the girl." Charlotte, who had remained quiet beside Evelyn, suddenly spoke up. "More suitable education? But I like my lessons with Mrs. Evelyn." "Oh, my dear." Lady Penelope addressed the girl with a condescension that sent a shiver of alarm through Evelyn. "I am sure Mrs. Hartwell has done her best, considering her limitations. But a girl of your position requires more than basic knowledge. She needs to learn refined etiquette, continental languages, arts that will prepare her for her role in society." "I know French," Charlotte protested, her blue eyes flashing with indignation. "And I know English history and mathematics and—" "Charlotte," Frederick intervened softly, but Evelyn detected uncertainty in his voice. "Lady Penelope is merely suggesting that perhaps it's time we considered a more formal education." "Precisely," Lady Penelope continued, turning her attention to Evelyn. "Not that there is any criticism of your work, Mrs. Hartwell. I am sure you have done your best within your capabilities. But Charlotte is a duke's daughter. Her future husband will likely be a peer of the realm, perhaps even a member of a European royal house. She requires an education that prepares her for such a destiny." Every word was uttered with impeccable politeness, but Evelyn felt the poisoned barbs hidden beneath the courtesy. Lady Penelope was not merely questioning her competence. She was systematically dismantling her position within the Ashworth household. "Lady Marlborough raises valid points," Frederick said slowly, avoiding Evelyn's gaze. Perhaps we should consider a governess with more experience in preparing young ladies for society. The words struck Evelyn like a physical betrayal. After all they had shared, after the transformation she had witnessed in both him and Charlotte, he was bowing to the social pressures represented by that elegant woman. No, Charlotte exploded, running to position herself between Evelyn and the adults. I don't want another governess. Mrs. Evelyn understands me. She makes me laugh. She helps me learn interesting things. I don't want to go to a school full of girls who will look at me with pity because my mama died. Charlotte! Frederick approached his daughter, but she recoiled, clutching Evelyn's skirt. I am not sending you away, child. I am merely considering what is best for your future. And I have no right to an opinion about my own future? Charlotte's question echoed in the drawing room like a challenge. Lady Penelope subtly furrowed her brows, clearly disapproving of such a display of self-will in a child. My dear Charlotte, she said with forced patience, children often do not know what is best for them. It is the adult's responsibility to make those decisions. But adults sometimes forget to ask how children feel, Charlotte retorted with a courage that made Evelyn's heart swell with pride and pain simultaneously. Evelyn looked at Frederick, hoping he would defend his daughter, that he would acknowledge the validity of her feelings. But she saw only a man torn between what his heart told him and what society demanded. Perhaps, Evelyn said finally, her voice firmer than she had expected, we should allow some time for everyone to carefully consider this decision. Oh, but there's no time to lose, Lady Penelope smiled. And for the first time, Evelyn saw something predatory in that expression. I have already taken the liberty of arranging an interview with Madame Rousseau, London's most respected French governess. She can begin next Monday. The silence that followed was as tense as a violin string about to snap. Evelyn understood then that she was not just losing a job. She was losing a family she had begun to consider her own. More painful still, she was losing the possibility of something more with Frederick, something that had only begun to blossom between them during those weeks of increasingly intimate companionship. Then it is decided, she said calmly, though her heart was breaking. I will prepare my things. Mrs. Evelyn, no. Charlotte threw herself into her arms, tears streaming down her small face. Please don't leave me. Evelyn hugged the girl tightly, breathing in the scent of lavender in her hair, engraving in her memory the small, trusting warmth of that body against hers. You are strong and intelligent, Charlotte, she whispered in her ear. Never forget that, and never let anyone convince you that your feelings don't matter. When she looked up, she met Frederick's gaze. For a moment she saw in him the same pain she felt, a hesitation that suggested he might not be as convinced as he appeared. But then he looked away, and she knew the decision was made. Lady Penelope departed that afternoon with the satisfaction of someone who had just executed a carefully orchestrated plan. Evelyn watched from her bedroom window as the elegant carriage drove away down the drive, carrying with it the woman who, in just a few hours, had managed to dismantle everything that had been built in the past weeks. The sound of the wheels on the gravel echoed like a final sentence. Night fell upon Ashworth Manor with an oppressive weight that seemed to permeate every corridor, every drawing room. Evelyn had begun to pack her few belongings when Charlotte appeared at her door, her small face swollen from crying, still wearing the muslin dress she had chosen with such care that morning to impress the visitor. I don't understand, the girl said, throwing herself into the armchair by the window. Papa promised we'd be a family, that he'd never send me away again. Evelyn paused in the folding of a blouse, the fabric trembling slightly in her hands. Your father isn't sending you away, dear. He's just doing what he believes is best for your future. But how can it be better to separate me from someone who makes me happy? The question came out laden with a pain that seemed too great for a child to bear. Lady Penelope doesn't even know me. How can she know what I need? It was the same question that hammered in Evelyn's mind. During dinner, a tense meal where Frederick had barely managed to meet her gaze and Charlotte had refused to eat, it had become clear that the decision had been made not based on Charlotte's needs, but on the social expectations that Lady Penelope represented. Sometimes adults forget that growing up doesn't just mean learning protocols and etiquette, Evelyn said carefully. They forget that first, we need to learn to be kind and brave people. Charlotte stood up and walked over to where Evelyn was, her small steps echoing in the room that would soon be empty again. Where will you go, Mrs. Evelyn? Probably back to Yorkshire. I have a distant cousin in Whitby who might take me in until I find a new position. What if I run away again? What if I follow you like I did the first time? Evelyn knelt before the girl, gently holding her small shoulders. Charlotte, you cannot spend your life running from challenges, and I cannot always be the answer to your problems. But you taught me that I have a right to my own opinion about my life. And you do. But you also need to learn to express that opinion in ways that adults can hear and respect. It was then that Frederick appeared in the open doorway, his silhouette framed against the light from the corridor. There was something different in his posture, a hesitation that had not been there during the afternoon, when Lady Penelope was orchestrating plans for Charlotte's future. Charlotte, he said softly, it's past your bedtime. I don't want to sleep. I want to stay here with Mrs. Evelyn. Child. Frederick entered the room, and Evelyn noticed he avoided looking directly at her. You need to understand that sometimes we do difficult things because they are necessary. Necessary for whom? Charlotte turned to her father with an intensity that made him stop abruptly. For me, or for Lady Penelope? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Frederick finally looked at Evelyn, and she saw in his eyes an internal battle he had not yet resolved. Lady Penelope has experience in preparing young ladies for society. She herself was educated at the French court before the Revolution. She knows protocols that I never needed to know to be happy until today, Charlotte interrupted him, her words carrying a maturity that surprised both adults. Evelyn stood up, feeling that she was witnessing a crucial moment between father and daughter. Perhaps I should leave you to talk alone. No. Charlotte clung to her skirt. Please stay. You are part of this family too. The word family echoed in the room as a painful reminder of what was being undone. Frederick ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Evelyn had learned to recognize as a sign of his internal turmoil. Charlotte, you need to understand that Lady Penelope isn't just offering education. She's offering social connections that can determine your future. Advantageous marriages, positions at court. And what if I don't want those things? You will change your mind when you grow up. How can you be so sure? Charlotte's voice trembled, but her determination remained firm. Did Mama want these things? Is that why she married you? Frederick visibly paled. Your mother? That is different. Why? Because she chose to marry someone she loved instead of accepting a convenient arrangement. Evelyn watched Frederick struggle with memories that clearly unsettled him. There was something in the story of his marriage that Charlotte had touched upon, something that complicated the simple narrative he was trying to construct about social necessity. Your mother was fortunate that love and convenience coincided, he said finally. But his voice lacked conviction. Or perhaps, Charlotte said with surprising perception, she had the courage to choose love, even when it wasn't convenient. The silence that followed was charged with unspoken tensions. Evelyn felt she was witnessing not just a discussion about Charlotte's future, but a revelation about the Ashworth's past that Frederick preferred to keep buried. It's late, Frederick said abruptly. Charlotte, go to your room. We will talk about this tomorrow. There's nothing to talk about if Mrs. Evelyn leaves early tomorrow, Charlotte retorted, but obeyed, heading slowly towards the door. She paused as she passed her father, looking up to meet his eyes. Papa, when Lady Penelope looks at me, she sees a doll that needs to be arranged for display. When Mrs. Evelyn looks at me, she sees a person. Can't you see the difference? The girl's words echoed in the room after she left. Frederick remained motionless for long moments, studying the floor as if it held answers to dilemmas he could not resolve. She isn't wrong, he said finally, his voice low and heavy. Evelyn, who had resumed packing her things, paused with a skirt in her hands. Your Grace? Charlotte. What she said about how you both see her. Frederick approached the window, looking out at the gardens plunged into darkness. Penelope truly sees her as a project. A potential young duchess, who needs to be shaped according to specific standards. And is that not what your Grace wants for Charlotte? Frederick turned to face her, and for the first time since Lady Penelope's arrival, Evelyn saw the man she had come to know during those weeks, vulnerable, questioning, capable of doubt. "I don't know what I want anymore," he confessed. "For months after Isabella's death, I lived on autopilot, doing only what was expected. You arrived and helped me remember how to be a father again. But then Penelope appears and reminds me of all the responsibilities I have beyond just being a father. And are those responsibilities more important than Charlotte's happiness?" "It's not a simple matter of happiness versus responsibility," Frederick approached her, his presence filling the small space between them. "Charlotte was born into a position of privilege that brings obligations. She will be one of the wealthiest women in England. She needs to be prepared for that. But prepared as a strong and principled person, or as a decorative piece in political games?" The question struck Frederick like a physical blow. Evelyn saw the exact moment her words hit their mark, forcing him to confront truths he had been avoiding. "Penelope mentioned something today that I haven't been able to get out of my head," he said slowly. "She said that Charlotte needs to learn to place duty above personal feelings. That this is the mark of a true aristocratic lady. And does your Grace agree?" Frederick hesitated, and in that hesitation, Evelyn saw the entire internal battle he was fighting. "Isabella never did that. She placed feelings above duty when she married me." The confession came out as a whisper, carrying the weight of years of stored memories. Evelyn completely stopped packing her things, realizing that Frederick was sharing something fundamental about his past. "Lady Penelope was right about one thing," he continued, still looking out the window. "Isabella had other options, more convenient suitors, alliances that would have strengthened her family's position. But she chose me because, in her words, I made her laugh. As Charlotte said I do with her," Evelyn murmured, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. "Precisely." Frederick turned to her, his eyes laden with renewed pain. "And look what came of it. Isabella died young, leaving a daughter who now needs to navigate the world alone. Perhaps if she had chosen duty, she would have lived a safe but joyless life, and Charlotte would never have existed." Evelyn completed softly. "Does your Grace truly believe that would have been better?" Frederick did not respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice carried decades of guilt and regret. "Sometimes I wonder if my love for Isabella was selfish. If by accepting her love, I condemned her to a more difficult life than she deserved. And now you fear that, by allowing Charlotte to follow her instincts, you will make the same mistake. I no longer know how to distinguish between protection and control, between love and selfishness." Evelyn approached him, her steps cautious on the wooden floor. "May I ask you a personal question, Your Grace?" Frederick nodded, not trusting his own voice. "If you could go back in time, would you choose not to marry Isabella to spare her the difficulties?" The answer came swiftly and definitively, "Never." "Then why would you steal from Charlotte the chance to make her own choices, even if they mean difficulties?" Frederick stared at her intently, as if seeing her for the first time. "How do you always manage to ask the right questions?" "Because I, too, faced the choice between security and happiness," Evelyn answered honestly. "And I chose to risk happiness by coming to London, even knowing I might fail. And do you regret it?" Evelyn looked around the room she was leaving, thought of Charlotte sleeping sadly downstairs, and remembered the weeks of joy they had shared as an improvised yet real family. "No," she finally said. "Even with it ending like this, I don't regret it." Frederick took a step closer, so close she could see the golden flecks in his green eyes, feel the warmth emanating from his presence. "Evelyn," he said, using her name for the first time without formality, "what would you say if I told you I don't want this to end like this either?" Evelyn's heart leaped, but she forced herself to maintain composure. "I would say that your lordship needs to decide what is more important, society's approval or your family's happiness. And if I chose family, then perhaps we would discover that some risky choices are worth it." Frederick then smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen since Lady Penelope's arrival. "Isabella used to say that the best things in life are never the safest. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. And I think she would approve of you. The words hung suspended between them, laden with possibilities neither dared to fully articulate yet. Outside, the night continued its silent vigil over Ashworth Manor, where 3 people tried to find the courage to choose happiness over convenience. Dawn arrived differently at Ashworth Manor. Evelyn awoke not to the familiar sound of Charlotte joyfully knocking at her door, but to the heavy silence that had settled over the house since the previous day's decision. Her belongings were packed in her worn leather trunk. Awaiting the carriage, Frederick had arranged to take her back to Yorkshire. She dressed with extra care, choosing her best gown, the same navy blue she had worn on her first day, as if she could preserve some dignity in the farewell that loomed. Outside her window, the gardens awoke under the golden morning light, oblivious to the human drama unfolding within the mansion. A soft knock at the door interrupted her melancholic thoughts. She expected to find Charlotte, but it was Whitmore who appeared, his usually impassive expression showing signs of genuine disturbance. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said in a voice lower than usual, "there is a situation that requires your immediate attention." Evelyn's heart pounded. "Charlotte?" The young lady did not appear for breakfast. When her companion went to wake her, she discovered the bed had not been slept in. The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Without hesitation, she followed Whitmore through the corridors to Charlotte's room. The door was wide open, revealing a scene that confirmed her worst fears. The bed was untouched, but the window remained open, curtains fluttering in the morning breeze. An improvised rope made of tied sheets hung from the sill down to the gardens below. "My God," Evelyn murmured, approaching the window. "When was she last seen?" "Around 9 o'clock last night, when Lady Charlotte retired to her rooms," Whitmore replied, his voice heavy with professional guilt. "The maids assumed she had fallen asleep early due to the stress of the day." Frederick appeared in the doorway at that moment, his hair disheveled and his face marked by a pallor that spoke of sleepless hours. When he saw the open window and the rope of sheets, all color drained from his face. "How long?" he said in a hoarse voice. "How long could she have been gone?" "Since dawn, at the very least," Evelyn quickly calculated, her heart contracting at the thought of Charlotte alone on the streets of London during the most dangerous hours. "Whitmore, did she take anything? Clothes, money?" The butler hesitated. "Some dresses are missing, and the small purse where she kept her allowance savings has also disappeared." Frederick ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Evelyn recognized as a sign of his growing despair. "She planned this. My 6-year-old daughter planned an escape because I—" His voice broke, unable to complete the sentence. "She went to where you were staying the first time," Whitmore offered hesitantly. "Perhaps she returned there." "No," Evelyn shook her head, a cold certainty settling in her chest. "She knows I was leaving today. She wouldn't look for me knowing I wouldn't be here to protect her anymore. Then where?" Frederick turned to her, his green eyes filled with an anguish that made her momentarily forget her own hurts. "Where would a 6-year-old go alone in London?" Evelyn closed her eyes, forcing herself to think as Charlotte would think. The girl was intelligent, determined, but also deeply wounded by the feeling of abandonment. Where would someone who felt betrayed by the only people she trusted run to? "The cemetery," she said suddenly, opening her eyes to find Frederick watching her intently. "She went to her mother's grave." Frederick paled even further, if that were possible. "Highgate Cemetery is miles from here." A child alone, walking through London. He didn't need to complete the sentence. Both knew the dangers that lurked for a small, well-dressed girl on the city streets, thieves, traffickers, or simply the relentless cold that could be fatal to someone so young. "I will have all the footmen search for her immediately." Whitmore moved towards the door, but Frederick's voice stopped him. "No, that would draw unnecessary attention. If news of Charlotte's disappearance spreads through society—" He didn't finish, but the implication was clear. "The scandal would be devastating to the family's reputation." "Then we will go ourselves," Evelyn said decisively, already moving towards the door. With every minute that passes, she either gets further away or puts herself in greater danger. Frederick followed her, his long strides easily catching up to hers in the corridors. "You don't have to come. In fact, you shouldn't. If we're wrong about the cemetery—" Charlotte came to me when she felt abandoned the first time. Evelyn interrupted him, stopping abruptly to face him. You may not like what that implies about your decision to dismiss me, but I am probably the only person she still trusts completely. The words hit Frederick like well-deserved slaps. He studied her for a long moment, and she saw in him the painful recognition of the truth she had uttered. You're right, he finally admitted. And I was wrong about everything. There was no time to elaborate on such a confession. Minutes later, they were in Frederick's fastest carriage, speeding through London, the horses' hooves echoing on the cobblestones like urgent drums. The city was waking around them, merchants opening their shops, maids carrying water, gentlemen heading to their clubs. But Evelyn saw everything through a fog of anxiety. Tell me about Isabella, she said suddenly, needing something to occupy her mind during the torturous journey. Charlotte mentioned you used to visit her grave together. Frederick looked out the carriage window, his fingers drumming nervously on the leather upholstery. In the first months after her death, Charlotte insisted on going to the cemetery every week. She said she needed to tell her mother about her studies, about the books she was reading. His voice wavered slightly. I thought it was morbid, unhealthy. I gradually began to discourage her. And when did you stop going completely? About 6 months ago. Charlotte seemed to have accepted it, so I assumed she had overcome the need. He turned to Evelyn, raw pain etched on his face. Once again, I misinterpreted my own daughter's feelings. She didn't overcome it, Evelyn understood with painful clarity. She merely learned that expressing her emotional needs bothered him, so she kept everything to herself. How could you see that so clearly when I, who have known her since birth, was so blind? Sometimes pain makes us short-sighted to the pain of others, Evelyn replied gently. And you were protecting your own heart as much as you were trying to protect hers. The carriage made a sharp turn, throwing them momentarily against each other. Frederick caught her to prevent her from falling, and for an instant they were extraordinarily close, their faces mere inches apart. Evelyn saw in his eyes not just paternal concern, but something deeper, regret, recognition, and a vulnerability he rarely allowed to show. Evelyn, he said her name like a confession. If anything happens to Charlotte because of my selfish decisions, nothing will happen, she interrupted him firmly. Though her own heart was pounding with fear, we will find her, and when we do, you will have another chance to make the right choices. Highgate Cemetery stretched before them like a silent city of marble and granite, its avenues lined with weeping angels and elaborate mausoleums that testified to human grandeur and mortality. Frederick knew the way to Isabella's grave well, an elegant white marble monument beneath a centuries-old oak, engraved only with her name and the dates that marked her far too brief life. It was Evelyn who saw her first. Charlotte was sitting on the marble ground before the headstone, still wearing yesterday's pink muslin dress, now crumpled and stained with dew. Her golden hair had escaped its braids, forming a disheveled halo around her pale little face. She was talking in a low voice to the stone, her words indistinct but laden with childlike urgency. Charlotte, Frederick called softly, not wanting to startle her. The girl raised her head, and when she saw her father and Evelyn approaching, her features contorted into an expression of defiance mixed with relief. I'm not coming back, she declared, with the impressive determination she had inherited from both parents. Not unless Mrs. Evelyn comes with us. Frederick approached slowly, as if Charlotte were a wild animal that might flee at any sudden movement. Charlotte, you gave us a terrible fright. Did you spend the entire night out here? I slept a bit leaning against the tree, the girl admitted, pointing to the oak. I wasn't very cold. Evelyn felt her heart break imagining little Charlotte alone in the darkness of the cemetery, using conversation with her dead mother as solace against loneliness and fear. And what were you telling your mother? She asked gently, approaching until she could kneel beside the girl. I was explaining how Papa wants to send me away again, Charlotte replied, her words hitting Frederick like daggers. And about how you were leaving because he chose Lady Penelope instead of us. Charlotte, Frederick knelt on the other side of the headstone, his fine clothes coming into contact with the cold marble without hesitation. I never wanted to send you away. I thought I was doing what was best for you. How can it be better to separate me from the people I love? The question echoed in the silence of the cemetery, laden with a wisdom that defied the age of the one who had asked it. Frederick looked at the name engraved on the stone, Isabella, then at his daughter, who had inherited not only her mother's beauty, but also her courage to question conventions. "Your mother asked me the same question once," he finally said, his voice thick with memories. "When her parents tried to persuade her to marry another man because it would be more convenient for the family." Charlotte and Evelyn watched him intently, feeling they were about to hear something fundamental about the family's history. "And what did she answer when you asked?"
"She said that some choices are more important than conveniences."
"That some things are worth any risk." Frederick gently touched the headstone, his fingers tracing the letters of Isabella's name. "She chose love, even knowing it would be more difficult. And now you want me to choose convenience." Frederick raised his eyes to meet his daughter's, and Evelyn saw the exact moment something fundamental shifted within him. The protective armor he had built around his heart, to shield her from pain, to shield her from difficult choices, finally shattered completely. "No," he said with a clarity that surprised all of them, including himself. "I want you to do what your mother would do. I want you to choose what makes you happy, even if it means disappointing Lady Penelope and half of London society." Charlotte slowly stood up, approaching her father with hopeful caution. "And does that mean Mrs. Evelyn can stay?" Frederick looked over his daughter's head at Evelyn, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, allowing father and daughter to find their way back to each other. "It means," he said carefully, "that I would like to ask Mrs. Evelyn to stay, not just as your governess, but as a permanent part of our family." Evelyn's heart leaped, but she forced herself to maintain composure. "In what capacity exactly?" Frederick stood up, extending a hand to help Charlotte to her feet as well. Then, surprisingly, he extended his other hand to Evelyn. "In whatever capacity she wishes to accept," he said simply. "As a governess, as a family friend, as—" He hesitated, then continued with renewed courage. "As the woman who brought light back into our home and taught me to be a father again." Charlotte looked between the two adults, her eyes shining with an understanding that went beyond her years. "Is Mrs. Evelyn going to be my new mama?" "Charlotte," Evelyn laughed softly, "things don't quite work that quickly." "But they could work," Frederick said, his voice carrying tentative hope. "With time, patience, and much care." Evelyn looked at the man who had transformed so much in so little time, at the courageous girl who had risked everything for those she believed in, and at the headstone that represented a woman who had chosen love over convenience. "Would Isabella approve?" she asked softly. Frederick smiled, the first truly radiant smile she had seen from him. "I think she already gave her approval by sending Charlotte to you on that very first day." Charlotte let out a cry of joy and threw herself into both their arms simultaneously, creating an awkward but perfect embrace beneath the ancient oak. And there, in the respectful silence of the cemetery where Frederick's first great love rested, a new family began to take shape, built not upon conventions or